5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hi, and thank you for tuning in to Grey Swan TV. Today I'll be discussing how to navigate the risk management journey within government, and in particular three aspects: government risk management policies, risk culture, and dealing with complexity. The journey will be in three chapters. Today I'll discuss Part 1, Government Risk Frameworks, using the Australian government as an example, and briefly consider other jurisdictions. In Part 2, we'll navigate organisational cultures and environmental complexity. And in Part 3, we'll look at recent Australian discussions and reviews about risk management and culture. And finally, I'll also offer some strategies to help you navigate your risk environment. Okay, let's start with government risk frameworks and consider where are they found, why do we have them, what's in them, and what is their impact. So where do you find risk management policies? Well, most of them are all found in normal operating frameworks on public expenditure that all government agencies have. In Australia, that's the Public Governance, Performance and Accountability Act. And as you can see from the slide, there are other jurisdictions that have similar types of legislation. Now, in terms of the PGPA, the key aspects of it are set out on this slide, and the most important element of this is the fact that there is a Commonwealth risk management policy, and that is also regulated under the Act. In addition to the need to account for public expenditure, a key driver of a risk management policy is the need for it to try and limit the amount of red tape in relation to public expenditure, but also to try and foster innovation. Hence the forward at the front of the copy of the Australian Commonwealth Risk Management Policy. The second part of risk as accountability, and particularly in the Australian context, is that risk management falls within the scope of overall accountability through Parliament, through annual reporting, through enterprise risks within a department. And this diagram sets out the rationale for how risk management fits in. Let's now look at the risk management policy itself. As you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, it's got 9 elements, and on the right-hand side you've got similar framework for the ACT risk management policy. Both policies essentially cover the same ground, and this is also somewhat similarly reflected in the diagram in the next slide, which shows elements of the Victorian government's risk management policy. The overall approach for all three policies remains the same: build a framework and policy, communicate and consult, allocate responsibility and accountability, embed the framework into daily decision making, and maintain and review. Risk management policies are also shaped by other factors, including significant events that affect an economy or a country. 2 examples spring to mind. One, the Victorian Black Saturday bushfires in 2009 led to a fundamental rethink at Victorian whole of government level about risk in terms of analysing whole of government risks and reporting on risks regularly to Cabinet. The sequence of New Zealand earthquakes in 2011 and 2012 also had a similar impact on whole of government thinking and is leading to the consideration of a whole of government fund in addition to the Earthquake Commission. Risk management policies are also shaped by language. In other words, the words you use to describe what you want people to do or not do. And in many cases, unfortunately, rules just become too negative, too much of a proxy for fairness, too reactive and focused on past behaviour, too much of a productivity tax where you have to find them and learn them, and too restrictive, effectively making the idea of compliance no more than a dance around the rules. Know where the line is and try to dance around and avoid it. That neither encourages productivity nor any innovation. The last factor we'll look at in terms of what affects risk management policies is the way in which in government expenditure there is political and public scrutiny. In 2007, a speech by Dr. Ken Henry, who was the then Secretary of the Federal Australian Treasury, He observed the lessons he learned from his time in bureaucracy involved the fact that people who manage projects on behalf of taxpayers operate in an adversarial, combative and political environment. Everything they do has the potential to embarrass the government of the day, and the opposition will always take the opportunity to do so. Secondly, he said that while public sector managers often do things to save money, the operating environment may not value this. In other words, savings are not valued as highly as losses, particularly through the glare of the media. Politicians face the same asymmetry from the media and the opposition. In other words, scandal sells. And not only that, public sector performance is often judged not on the actual performance, but on the perception. Hence, the public service needs to focus very clearly on the way something might look, not actually how well they have performed. Lastly, short-term timelines are overvalued relative to the medium to long term, and when you align this with a ministerial risk tolerance of 0, you end up with an extremely risk-averse environment in dealing with risks. So with all of this in mind, what does good look like? Well, a useful government benchmark is the 6 levels of risk maturity used by the Australian Government's fund manager ComCover when it annually surveys over 150 APS entities. The 6 capability levels, as set out there, are fundamental, developed, systematic, integrated, advanced and optimal. I have only referred to level 3, systematic, to give you an idea of just how much work is required to be classified as at the systematic level. So how have Australian government agencies gone against this spectrum? Well, every year the Australian Government surveys its staff and agencies on a range of factors including risk management and risk behaviours. The 2017-18 report, which was 4 years after the risk management policy was introduced, suggested there was still significant room for improvement in the way public servants manage risk. As to why this occurs, we will consider this a bit later. Another recent indicator of how the Australian Public Service is performing can be found in the 2018 review of the PGPA Act by David Thodey and Elizabeth Alexander. That review report also emphasised the need for public sector leaders to step up and drive and shape risk culture. However, a number of concerns remained in the report, which was also reflected in the Australian Public Service survey referred to earlier. So, what are these factors? Cultural change remains slow. Risk maturity across agencies and within agencies is highly variable. Process, not surprisingly, dominates practicality. People aren't sure who owns what risk, who should control it, and when things go pear-shaped, you really don't find who's truly accountable. Linked to that, insufficient communication and consultation. And risks and risk owners are not always identified and allocated. In particular, shared risk within an organisation across various areas or even across organisations is very poorly reported, negotiated or dealt with. Hence the drive for leaders to step up. Well, that takes us to the end of part 1 of our look at government risk networks. What they are, why they exist, what they're trying to do and how they've been effective or not so far. Next week on GSTV, we're going to look at part 2, which will be the difficult waters of organisational culture and environmental complexity. See you next week. This has been a GSTV production.